Boston, 1765. The streets reeked of salt and smoke. British ships choked the harbor, their cargo taxed by men who never set foot on these shores. Soldiers marched the cobblestone like they owned it, and in the taverns, voices began to rise. They said we were subjects, colonists, that we owed our loyalty to a king across the sea. But beneath a simple elm tree, growing on a modest stretch of land near Essex Street, something old stirred. Not rebellion, not yet. Liberty. Not granted, not given, claimed. It started with whisperers. A printer with ink-stained fingers, a blacksmith with fire still in his chest, a farmer tired of watching his future taxed into dust. They stood beneath that elm. No titles, no ranks, just men with a question burning in their hearts. If we do not stand now, what will we leave our sons? That tree, once nothing more than wood and leaf, became sacred ground, a symbol, a sentinel, and from its branches they hung effigies of tyrants, not out of cruelty, but clarity. They were not mobs, they were messengers. They did not plead, they proclaimed. We see you, we do not consent. They called themselves the Sons of Liberty, but they wore no uniform, they sought no throne, they only carried one weapon, the truth. In taverns and alleyways, by candlelight and press, they fanned the embers of resistance. Not for glory, not for revenge, but because they believed in something radical, that all men were born free, and no empire had the right to steal that birthright. Tyranny came with decrees and muskets. Liberty answered with courage and ink. They tarred no kings, but they lit the minds of men. They burned no homes, but they ignited a revolution. And that tree, that blessed tree of liberty, became more than a meeting place. It became a banner, a promise, a reckoning. Because where liberty grows, tyranny dies. And long before the world would call it revolution, we called it something else. We called it the beginning. This is Fathers of Liberty.
Plant the seed in our homeland, boys, let it grow where all can see. Feed it with our devotion, boys, call it the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty.
Hi guys, welcome to Fathers of Liberty, where we try to educate and engage faithful, patriotic fathers around the spirit of liberty. Our goal is to recreate founding fathers in our day to reignite the spark of liberty in an age of tyranny. What's up, guys? Welcome to Fathers of Liberty. I'm so glad you're here today. My name is Phil Dunson. I am a father, husband, and father of four. And I grew up in Oklahoma and spent some time in Texas. And now I'm in Utah. Very happy to be here in this great state of Utah. And me and my co-host Rashawn have had a great desire to build a podcast that talks about the 10 years prior to the American Revolution, specifically 1765 to 1776, and mainly because there's a very pivotal time in this early days of our founding where the spirit of liberty was alive in the people to the point at which they knew their liberties, and they knew how to resist tyranny properly. I feel that we are at a breaking point, and we are uh, not wise to our founding. We are not wise to our heritage, and we have uh, become so corrupt as a country because of some of these things. And so I really excited to be on this podcast just to learn more myself about our founding and to see why there was such something so special in Boston that we can really glean from. Uh, what about you, Rashawn? How are you excited for this podcast?
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. So I'm Rashawn, and I am a husband, father of 3 girls, and I grew up in Wisconsin. Grew up in the Midwest, and we just recently moved out to Utah as well. Glad to be here. We moved here last year, and so I grew up Amish Mennonite, and so I was home. I was private schooled, and so I wasn't taught a lot about the founding fathers. There were some things about, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, some of that, but not, before the American Revolution, the Sons of Liberty, and that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
that's also my desire for the podcast, is to learn and learn myself, and therefore take you guys through what we're learning and share that and go from there.
that's awesome, man. Yeah. So one of the big points with this is our lost heritage. We have lost our heritage because it was intentionally not taught to us, not taught to us correctly, taught to us in a manipulated way. A lot of misinformation. That's a buzzword right now in our day, but it truly is. We were not informed of what the truth is. So we want to take these American fossils. We want to dust them off so that we can see what's really going on here. And when we dust them off just a little bit, we start seeing that the guys in Boston were pretty cool. They were pretty radical. They were pretty not woke. They were strong men, and we really want to emulate them as much as we can, and just learn from them, and know that there was a very unique time in history that they were born into, and they responded well, and they responded so well that it created this great country that we are now living in, the freedoms that we are now living in, and we need to pick up the torch of liberty so that it doesn't get lost even in our day. And so yeah, it just goes to the point of the quote, "You must know your history or you're doomed to repeat it." We don't need to reinvent the wheel for liberty. We can just take a look at some of our founding and some of these things that sparked liberty in that age, and rediscover these things and really educate each other on them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. And going through this, you find out that they were very intelligent men.
Yeah,
Like, they were very well read,
yeah.
and so they weren't just a bunch of brawlers from Boston, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. And
Hmm.
that's kind of the picture that you get from the media or history books or
Yeah.
whatever. Is like they were just these radical brawlers, when in fact they were really intelligent, and there's a reason that they did what they did.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and they were radical in the right way, right?
right.
Civil disobedience, in a sense. Some would say not, but I think they were in the terms that they needed to be, and they also had the strength that they needed from the community. Uh, so there's a lot of things we could talk about on the front end, but really we just want to reawaken liberty in our day. We want to spark sons of liberty, trees of liberties, and really that's why we're called the fathers of liberty, because we are looking for other faithful, patriotic fathers that want to learn about liberty and really reawaken it in their minds, that we may really uh, fight the forces of tyranny in our day. So, so yeah, that lends to our first story. the story of the Tree of Liberty. Maybe you haven't heard this story before, but it's a very profound story that is powerful when you look at it and really dissect it. And it's really the crux of this podcast. And so we'd like to start off this podcast with the story of the Tree of Liberty.
Before we jump in, let me share a story about the Tree of Liberty in Boston that sets the stage for what this podcast is about. This is a perfect example for why we are creating this podcast. It's about radical patriots that resisted tyranny in their local community. This story begins in 1763, marking the end of the French and Indian War. This story about liberty and resistance reaches its climax and crescendo in 1765 and continues on into 1766. This conflict was a pivotal chapter in American history, as the American colonists fought alongside the British Army to secure a significant victory over the French. With the Treaty of Paris, the British had successfully eliminated French power in North America, establishing themselves as the dominant force on the continent. However, this triumphant victory came at a steep cost. The British government found itself in a severe financial predicament following the war. The expenses of effectively combating the French had drained the British treasury, leaving the homeland in a state of crippling debt. The war had secured Britain's place in the New World, but the economic strain was felt acutely back in Britain. In an attempt to address this financial crisis, the British government decided that the American colonists, who had benefited from the war's outcome, should contribute to the repayment of the debt. Thus, in 1765, just 2 years after the end of the French and Indian War, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act. This legislation imposed a direct tax on the colonies, mandating that revenue stamps be affixed to a variety of documents, including contracts, licenses, newspapers, and even playing cards. However, the reaction in America was overwhelmingly negative. Disapproval of the Stamp Act was nearly unanimous among the colonists. While there was a general consensus against the tax, there was a division on the best course of action to respond to it. Some advocated for peaceful petitions and appeals to the British government, hoping to persuade them to repeal the act. Others, fueled by a growing sense of resentment and injustice, leaned towards more radical forms of protest. In Boston, site of the first and most influential Liberty Tree, the political protest against the Stamp Act at the tree came first. A month later, the tree got its name. The elm was located in the south end of the town, on the grounds of Deacon Elliott's house at the intersection of Essex and Newbury Streets, today Essex and Washington. Well known since early in the century as Deacon Elliott's Corner, Boston was on a peninsula, and the tree was a half-mile into town on the only roadway that led from the narrow neck of the land from the mainland into the heart of the city. It was a few blocks from the Common, where there was a grove of great elms, and 5 or 6 blocks from the political center of the colony, where the townhouse, today the old State House, was the site of the provincial government of Massachusetts. It housed the chambers of the royal appointed governor and his appointed council, the Supreme Court of the province, and the General Court, composed delegates elected by each town. The Stamp Act could hardly have been more obnoxious to American colonists. It was an act of taxation passed by Parliament in which the colonists were unrepresented. The incidence of the tax could not have been broader. The law requires stamped paper of a specific amount to be affixed to legal documents: land contracts, lawyers' licenses, ship clearances, appointments, liquor licenses, articles of apprenticeship, newspapers and printed matter, college diplomas, even playing cards and dice. It came in the midst of hard times for the seaport cities when cash was scarce. In the summer of 1765, the stamps were on the high seas on the way to each colony, along with the commissions to the Americans appointed as Stamp Act distributors.
As dawn broke out on August 14, 1765, 2 effigies were found hanging from a branch of the tree, one stuffed with straw labeled A.O., identifying Andrew Oliver, secretary to the province. Bostonian commissioned as distributor of the Stamp Act paper. The other a large boot with the devil peeping out, holding the Stamp Act, meant to symbolize the Earl of Bute, considered the eminence Greece behind King George III. Oliver was the brother of Peter Oliver, Justice and later Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Massachusetts. The Olivers were in-laws to Thomas Hutchinson, the lieutenant governor. The boot was a pun on boot, and the green painted bottom, a green vile soul, was a reference to George Grenville, the minister responsible for the act. A pun so arch that it had to be explained to passers-by. Boots and shoes, by the common law of New England, were used to ward off or trap an evil spirit that attempted to enter a dwelling. It was the beginning of a day of mockery, at first hilarious, then grim, as farmers drove their carts into town delivering produce. The Patriot organizers stopped each cart and did a mock stamping of the goods, a piece of street theater worthy of the Marx Brothers. News spread fast. Over the course of the day, a vast number of spectators, or many thousands, showed up at the tree, including women, apprentices, 200 or 300 schoolboys who paraded with a flag, African Americans, slave and free. A good part of the town, about 15,000, turned out. It was not that effigies were new to Boston. For several decades, every November 5th, Guy Fawkes Day in England, Pope's Day in New England, North End and South End companies, organized by neighborhood, paraded giant effigies of the devil, the Pope, and the Stuart pretender to the British throne through town on carts, and at nightfall fought a bone-breaking battle royale, the victor burning the loser's effigies on a high hill. But burlesquing living political figures, one of them in their midst, was uncommon. The governor ordered that the effigies be taken down, but the sheriff would not risk a confrontation. The hanging effigies were a mock execution. At 5 p.m., a mock funeral began, following the common practice in Boston of carrying the coffin of the deceased through the streets on the way to a burial ground. The effigies were cut down, laid on a bier carried by 6 men, and a cortege of several thousand marched behind them in solemn procession to the town center. They passed the State House, where they shouted the slogans, "Liberty, property, and no stamps," gave 3 huzzahs for the governor and his council, and after some disagreement as to the route, proceeded to Andrew Oliver's office on Oliver's dock, assumed to have been built to house the stamps. Using a battering ram, they leveled the building in half an hour, pulling down buildings whose owners were in defiance of some public purpose was another time-honored crowd custom in Boston, the place where radical patriots were born. A smaller contingent then made its way to Oliver's nearby mansion to demand that he publicly resign his commission. But he had already left. The street theater now reached a climax. The crowd cut off the head of the effigy of Oliver and threw it into a giant bonfire on nearby Fort Hill, a traditional site for public bonfires, pulled down Oliver's fence and the doors to his coach house, ceremoniously stamping each piece of timber before throwing it in the fire. Meanwhile, part of the crowd entered the mansion, destroying such tokens of Oliver's wealth as his huge mirrors, glass windows, and fine furniture, and helping themselves to his liquor. Lieutenant Governor Hutchinson and the sheriff appeared, but beat a hasty retreat. The next morning, Oliver sent word via friends he would resign. All these rituals of mockery were like a keyboard that could be played lightly, satirically, or struck brutally. 2 weeks after this, on September 11th, 1765, after news arrived that the detested Grenville might be succeeded by William Pitt, considered a friend of America, the tree was dedicated. A copper plaque with the words, "The Tree of Liberty," stamped thereon in golden letters, according to the newspaper, was nailed to the trunk with large deck nails, and a British flag was hoisted high in the tree with the motto, "Pitt, the supporter of liberty and the terror of tyrants."
The Tree of Liberty became a symbol and icon of the day. It was the place where effigies were hung, warnings and calls to political action were posted, and where a flag was hoisted on a flagstaff called the Liberty Pole, which the governor observed. went through the tree and a good deal above as a signal for people to assemble. The flag was huge. The surviving piece is 12 by 7 feet tall. The vertical red stripes on a white background. The tree was a place for street theater, deliberations, and celebrations. In March 1766, at the false news of the repeal of the Stamp Act, the tree was decorated in a splendid manner with lanterns. At noon there was music, followed by a choral singing of the Song of Liberty. In May 1766, at the news of the actual repeal, 45 lanterns were hung the first night, 108 the second night, augmented with so many more that the limbs could hold no more. An obelisk on the common, designed by Paul Revere, featured the Liberty Tree as a central symbol of the successful struggle. Fireworks, rockets, and serpents burst into the air, and the obelisk, alas, went up in flames, for it could be moved under the Liberty Tree. The tree was also a place at which martyrs to the cause were consecrated. In 1770, Christopher Sider, an 11-year-old boy, was killed in the aftermath of a mass picketing by boys of a merchant who refused to comply with the Patriot boycott of British imports. A coffin with his corpse was set down under the tree and a biblical warning to the murderer posted on it. The funeral procession of several thousand began at the tree. A month later, the massive cortege of the first 4 victims of British troops in the Boston Massacre began downtown, winded its way past the tree, and made its way back to the burial grounds in the center. Above all, the tree was a site for rituals of popular justice. In the words of Justice Oliver in the history of the late horrid rebellion, written in exile, his pen dipped in bile, this tree stood in the town and was consecrated for an idol for the mob to worship. It was proper where those whom the rioters pitched upon as state delinquents were carried to for a trial or brought to as a test for political orthodoxy. In December 1765, his brother Andrew was summoned to appear under the Liberty Tree for a formal public resignation of his commission. In February 1766, a mock trial of a chained Stamp Act was conducted on a stage erected under the tree before a crowd of 2,000, which a jury found the prisoner guilty of a breach of Magna Carta and a design to subvert the British Constitution. In 1768, the Customs Commissioner and in 1773, the agents for the sale of East India Tea Company were summoned to the tree for their resignation, all of whom refused to appear. The area under and around the tree became known as Liberty Hall, a public space where white male Bostonians, without regard to property, could take part in public life. For the moment, such assemblages replaced the official town meeting, the most democratic institution in the city, for which there was a property requirement for voting, which excluded a large segment of the laboring classes. They also usurped the judicial function, where a small number of men might sit on a jury, a prized right of Englishmen, but where the people at large were expected only to ratify the decisions of the court by attending executions en masse.
The actions around the tree in 1765 through 66 brought into play the social classes that contended with each other in the resistance to Britain in the decade that followed. The better sort, some 150 to 200 export-import merchants at the apex of Boston's economy and society. The middling sort, master artisans, shopkeepers, professionals, and the lower sort, artisans in the inferior trades, journeymen, apprentices, day laborers, seamen, and sometimes Negroes. The Loyal Nine, who coordinated the initial activities, were a small social circle of the middling sort, for the most part prosperous artisans in the higher trades, a jeweler, a painter, 2 braziers, 2 distillers, a printer, and a sea captain. Several members had connections to other groups. Benjamin Eads was co-printer of the Patriot newspaper, Boston Gazette. John Avery Jr., the only Harvard graduate among them, was a son of a principal merchant. The Loyal Nine made the arrangements for August 14th with Ebenezer McIntosh, the head of the South End Pope's Day Company, who alone had the experience and network to mobilize the lower sort and negotiate a union with the North End Company, led by a shipwright, Henry Swift. The group met in the office of a member's distillery close to the site from which they could keep track of activities at the tree. When they named the elm the Tree of Liberty, they took to calling themselves the Sons of Liberty, the phrase Isaac Farr used to identify the colonists in a speech to Parliament. Before long, Patriot leaders of Boston took it over as a generic name for themselves, but it did not become the name of a specific organization as it did in some other towns. Lieutenant Governor Hutchinson was very conscious of the class divisions among patriots as he explained this new model of government in Boston to his superiors in London. It had 3 branches, a play on the word tree. The lowest branch composed of the rabble, headed by one Mackintosh, who act when there is an occasion to hang or burn effigies or pull down houses. They were somewhat controlled, his emphasis, by the master masons, carpenters, in effect, the middle branch. But when anything of more importance was to be determined, such as any matters of trade, these first 2 groups are under the direction of a committee of merchants, presumably the upper branch. Matters of a general nature might be submitted to the town meeting. Hutchinson's analysis was not off the mark. Merchants had recently formed their own chamber of commerce. The North End Caucus, which more or less managed the town meetings, included major town officials. Master artisans had no overall organization, but were accustomed to taking action by trades or meeting in social groups. In the Pope's days, companies were the only ad hoc organizations among the lower sort, wanted by years of these rituals of a day in which they took over the town. From the very first, merchants and master artisans practiced crowd control of the rabble. At the head of the Anti-Stamp Act procession on August 14 were 40 or 50 tradesmen, decently dressed, Hutchinson's phrase, taken by Governor Bernard to be gentlemen disguised as tradesmen. Earlier that day, when the label blew off the effigy of Oliver, the man who climbed up a ladder to replace her, according to a gentleman observer, wore trousers over his breeches, but when a leg of his trousers slit up, it was clear he was wearing a silk stocking breeches, a garment not of the lowest class. He correctly observed this man very likely was one of the Loyal 9. The day after the August 26th action, prominent town leaders, the 3rd branch in action, demanded Mackintosh's release from jail, and they got it. In October 1765, the better source swallowed their class pride and cemented the cross-class alliance at dinner. John Hancock and several other gentlemen of fashion wined and dined the officers, and a good many members of the 2 Pope's Day companies had an affair attended by about 200. Hancock, who had inherited the largest fortune in New England the year before, also paid for the handsome uniforms in which the Pope's Day's leaders soon appeared. At the November 1st procession, Colonel William Brattle, commander of the province's militia and a member of the governor's council, marched arm in arm with the newly regaled Mackintosh, treating him as an officer of the government. In short, merchants in the middling sort in the Loyal 9 did their best to flatter, steer, and fence in Mackintosh and his colleagues, who could bask in a respectability they had never known before. For 7 years, 1765 until 1773, the annual Pope's Day celebrations became harmonious, peaceful spectacles, targeting the current enemy of the day, detested by patriots of all classes. But after 1766, the Sons of Liberty leaders shunted Mackintosh aside, substituting one of their own inner circle whenever they wanted to raise a mob they could control. Historians have found it unusually difficult to document the inner workings of the several patriotic circles in Boston, and only in recent years have shed the stereotype of Samuel Adams as the puppeteer who pulled all the strings in Boston. Leadership flowed from different centers, which had to be coordinated, but central control under a single person or group was not likely. In the only letter which fills the beans for 1765 to 66, Henry Bass, a member of the Loyal 9, reported shortly after the forced resignation of Oliver on December 17th that the whole affair was transacted by the Loyal 9. He spelled out their actions, writing the letter demanding Oliver's resignation, getting the advertisements printed, and having the notice pasted up to the amount of 100, a chore done the night before between 9 o'clock and 3 a.m. in the morning,
This became the modus operandi of action sponsored by the Sons of Liberty. Planning former printed notices, calling a meeting at a designated place, action decided upon in advance. Bass asked his correspondents to keep this a profound secret. We do everything in order to keep this and the first affair private, and are not a little pleased to hear that Mackintosh has the credit of the whole affair. We was the loyal nine, and the first affair was the event of August 14th, the beginning of the Tree of Liberty, the beginning of the revolution.
Wow, what a story. What a story.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you just see how how the American Revolution came about, with where it started, the end of the French and Indian War, and British wanted to tax the American colonists.
Yeah.
And then they obviously they were being unrepresented,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, that's just kind of how it all
Yeah.
began.
Classic phrase, taxation without representation, right? Yeah, I think it's so powerful to really think about this, and how what we're reading and what we're learning about here is truly the start of the experiment of America, the experiment of liberty. And it was only because they felt that they were backed into a corner, that they were being treated poorly, and there was injustice happening. And but we wouldn't have America if we didn't have this spirit of liberty. And I love reading this story because it reminds us about what it is to truly know liberty, and how to make it a thing that is a force that you gather a community around. Because there's so much in this story that we can learn about from the way that they coordinated around the tree, to all the different peoples of higher to lower classes that were involved in this, and to the fact that the sheriff couldn't even take down an effigy because he was afraid of the people. That there was actual fear, there was actual force that was happening, and uh, and just the way that they were assembling. That one of the crazy things as we were reading and studying this is just to hear how big of a deal this was for the founders. For this was not something on the sidebar. This was something that was everybody knew about. This was, I mean, we get the classic Thomas Jefferson quote about the Tree of Liberty. He knew about it. Everybody knew about it. It was the thing of the day. It was the highlight. And so it's something we don't even know about. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to kind of look into it.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me, what was interesting, is they were actually appealing to the Magna Carta and the British Constitution, and so they were resisting the British based off of their own constitution and their own law. That's the law that they knew coming from England, and so it's really interesting because they weren't just making up their own law and saying, well, we're not going to obey you now because we have our own law. They were actually appealing to the British Constitution and were saying, no, you usurped your right, and so we're going to resist this because we know what the law is, and you're overstepping.
Yeah, and as that gets flushed out, then it gets to the Declaration of Independence, right? And it gets to really, okay, now we're gonna move it to America. We're gonna move it to independence. We don't even know what that's gonna look like, but we're gonna declare it, and we're gonna do that with the Declaration of Independence, right? And so you've given us a law. We all know it. We've all been learned in it. We are Englishmen, and now you are being tyrannical against this law that we all agreed upon. And now we're a sea away, and you're throwing down these ridiculous laws that we can't do. And we are appealing to you, but yet you, from your high throne, are saying, it doesn't matter. Those little colonists, we don't need them, And who are they? Who do they think they are? And these were very, very smart men, right? And so I do love that, and how the Tree of Liberty became this site of popular justice where they would appeal to this as justice. And I think that reminds me of a James Madison quote where he states, justice is the end of government. It is the end of civil society. It ever has been and ever will be pursued until it be obtained, or until liberty be lost in the pursuit. And so justice is the end goal of government. We need justice. Government is not there mainly for tariffs. Government is not there mainly for military. The government is there for justice. Justice mainly inside the border of that country.
Right.
We are to enact laws that are just and quickly execute the crime for the criminal. When someone steals from me, that is when we have agreed upon a government in which we will have represent us, and therefore that the thief cannot continually get away. Otherwise, it's anarchy, right? The opposite of anarchy is government, right? Anarchy is everything running wild. And so we need justice, right? And so that's something that I think they were appealing to and saying, this is unjust. You're not a lawful government because you're doing unjust things.
Right. And also I think they were the founding fathers, they were basing it off of biblical principles as well. And, the government is there to punish the evildoer and reward the good, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you said, it's justice.
Mm-hmm.
If you do evil things, you steal,
Mm-hmm.
kill, destroy, there needs to be justice, and it needs to be done quickly, speedily.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of the passage in Ecclesiastes 8:11, where it says, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. So you see what happens when it isn't executed speedily. It festers and it becomes worse, and there's just more anarchy, like you said, in our world if there isn't justice quickly.
Yeah, and I think of that now in our present day. I mean, the news of the day here isn't the Tree of Liberty and the radical protest. It's Doge and the radical revolution that they are having within the federal government that has become so bloated, so incompetent, so corrupt. And the crazy thing is everyone is so excited about us cutting waste. Oh, we were spending billions and trillions, and wow, we just cut 50 billion here, 50 billion there. Oh, and 100 billion went to Ukraine, and then 400 billion went to Ukraine, and half of it was lost. But it's so insane how the target has moved to now. We're not talking about true justice or criminality, or that being sentenced speedily. We're talking more about, man, how much waste can we cut? And that's a great thing. I want to cut waste. Deficit is a problem, but man, what about, let's talk about the thief who took the hundreds of millions from the American people, right? Is anybody saying that? I don't hear it out there. I hear, look at Doge just knocking it off, just cutting down the fraud, the waste. But nobody is actually talking about justice.
Right.
That's the base of the government from our founding fathers, not just to figure out tariffs and all the different commerce that is a part of government, which we will learn about in this podcast. But mainly, man, justice. Justice is the end of the government. So
Yep.
we need government to order justice, to give us just laws, right? Law and order.
Yep.
And I'm glad that Trump is really for that, but
Yeah.
we can get a little distracted for sure. So
Yeah, I agree.
this is another reason for us to say, hey, what the reason the Tree of Liberty was so powerful in this moment is because it was appealing to justice. All people understand that. All people will stand behind that. All people will say, I am for that, right? And so people can see that.
Right.
And another really cool thing about the story that I liked was the connection of higher and lower classes. That there was this cross between the richest people and the lowest people, and they all agreed and were together and at the same level playing ground at the Tree of Liberty.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well. Yeah, the 3 branches, but yet the ground was level at the Tree of Liberty, just like you said there.
Yeah. So as we kind of go through this story and really why the Tree of Liberty, why Rashawn and Phil, do you want us to know about Tree of Liberty? One of the things that I think is most powerful of the Tree of Liberty is in our current world, we are disconnected. We are a disconnected society. Social media is, presented as a great connection, but it's actually disconnected us greatly. And so we don't know our fellow countrymen, our fellow patriots face to face. And the Tree of Liberty was something that men met face to face. They came to each other, they organized in their local community, and they were able to, vouch for each other and use their talents and gather and properly resist the tyrants in their local area,
Yeah, and one of the things that makes me think of is, how X is like the modern day
Public square.
square, right? So
Yeah.
there's discussions and debates on there, and that's great. But like you said, it's also that's on social media. So like we need something more as well. Like
Yeah.
we can still use that, but then we need a Tree of Liberty in our local community,
Mhm.
and that can be wherever you decide to meet.
Yeah.
But a place where you meet face to face to talk about these issues, and
Yeah. And
just
as we read about this story, it was an iconic spot. It was a place, Deacon Elliot's house or wherever that was,
right.
where the great elms were. It was a huge tree. It was something that everyone knew, right? And so as we talk about this podcast, as we start producing more and really dissecting um, the spirit of liberty in this age so that we all can learn liberty more, we need to think about in our local area, what are the icons? What are the areas that everyone would know? And what is our potential Tree of Liberty? Because for tyranny to be stopped, we need to have a Tree of Liberty in every local community, because the founders thought local. They did not think federal. They thought local. Federal was something that came as the government kept going and being stronger and stronger, i.e., executive actions right now, right? But yeah, so it was also something in the colony in that day that there were trees of liberties everywhere, that they were all throughout the colonies. Men gathered and repealed Stamp Act, resisted tyranny, and I would bet the Minutemen were connected through that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was a symbol. It was something that was a proper resistance. It was very effective sort of resistance, to the point at which the leader of the militia of the area and council on the government, was marching arm in arm with McIntosh, this brawler that was leading the mob. And he was, they let him out of jail. They said, yeah, you can get out because the people want you out.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like we were saying, they were properly educated in their history and their rights, and they knew their Magna Carta.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to do here with
Mhm.
with you guys, is we want to go through the Constitution and learn more about our rights and our liberties, freedom, so that we can, better know when there's usurpations of the government, and so how we can, properly resist
Mhm.
when
Yeah.
they overstep.
Yeah, and we're just common laymen here. We want to learn with you.
Yep.
We're not big professors
Nope.
with big diplomas, but we are here to learn it because we want to act on it and we want it to take effect. We don't want it just to be a story that we talk about. We want to engage as a delegate. We want to engage as a poll worker. We want to engage as a person that is willing to get on the streets to say this needs to be represented. This needs to be talked about. If there's illegal immigrants that are in your local area, see also Colorado, whenever there was that, Trende Aragua, whatever apartment being taken over.
Yeah.
There was also Patriot men coming there with AR-15. So we are not saying we want to take over and overthrow
No.
the government of any sort, but we do want to be a force that is standing against a tyrannical force as well. So
Right.
if there are criminals there and justice is not being served, we want to stand there to help fight for those that are not fought for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, I think you brought that out good. Just like we're not looking to overthrow anything,
Mhm.
but we're there. We want to know our rights and our laws so that we know, we know how to stand firm. When something like COVID comes around again, like you should know your law and
should
your
know your liberty.
rights,
Yeah.
your liberty.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of guys didn't, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they got affected. And they lost their jobs, right? Yeah. They got the jab. Yeah. That's what the Magna Carta part was really good for me thinking through that. Like, I always think of George Washington, of John Adams, Sam Adams, all these guys as Americans, right?
Right.
But
Yep.
they were Englishmen first.
Right.
They were all
Englishmen,
Englishmen.
Yep.
They were English countrymen.
Right.
Some of them, yeah, they were longer Englishmen than they were American.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how crazy, right? We don't even think about that. And to think about that is to say, hey, if in this day, in this time, if we're in a time where we need to uh, rekindle the spirit of liberty and really replicate founding fathers, how can we do that today? Do we need that today? Do we need a different type of America? We need to be learned like they were. We need to be able to have that knowledge in our mind. These old classical works of literature that was enabling these men to think so clearly and write things that were so effective for hundreds of years. And we're not going to do that by going to our public schools. We're not going to do that even going to our colleges. They have to be unique colleges.
Right.
But even with those, I've seen the mainstream stuff. I love Hillsdale. I love a lot of different people. And, but I don't hear about the Tree of Liberty at all. I don't hear about Sons of Liberty. I don't hear about any of that stuff. It's always revolution on. Let's do that.
Right.
And it's just not appealing to how did we even get here, guys? So yeah, it was something that was infectious and it was replicated well. I think it brought a lot of excitement in the colonies and power to the people, not the elites. So
Yeah, it really ignited the common man to his liberties. And yeah, I don't know if you have that quote, but I think John Adams said something about what was it, 1765 being the greatest year of his life, and it had something to do with maybe you can share it if you have it.
Yeah, it says John Adams concluded that 1765 had been the most remarkable of his life. The Stamp Act had electrified a continent. The people were more attentive to their liberties, more inquisitive about them, and more determined to defend them than they were ever before. And he also says in a different version of that quote that from the highest to the lowest, the people were attentive to their liberties. And that is a big piece of this puzzle that we're trying to do. We're trying to teach men be attentive to their liberties. When I look around, I don't see men that are attentive to their liberties.
No.
I see men that are more conditioned to comfort, more conditioned to ease,
Yeah.
and what tax do I need to do? And yeah, I could talk forever on taxes, and I don't even want to do that. But so yeah, one of the things that we want to do, and why Fathers of Liberty specifically is, like we said, just the need to re-educate the conditioning of tyranny that is alive here in America. We want to know the right focus for the future of America. How do we engage faithfully in our communities? We want to also have this be an on ramp for you guys to really recognize how do I go out and be a delegate? How do I go out and try for city council? How do I be a poll worker, an election judge? All these different realms of government that usually aren't sought after, and they're not flashy. They're difficult. They cause a lot of sacrifice, and they suck.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they're intentionally like that. The people set them up so that they can control them. If what I found whenever we lived in Richardson, Texas, what I found is, if Richardson, Texas has 80,000 people and they have an election, they don't really notify anybody about that. You got to go figure it out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if just 2,000 people vote in one of those elections for a precinct of 13,000 people, it's very easy to manipulate 2,000 people.
Right.
It's a lot harder to manipulate 9,000 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want people to know about these elections. Even the words on the ballots are very confusing. They're double negatives, and it's not for the common man. And so there's so much to learn, so much to grow in. There's a good quote that says, we're only one generation away from communism. It's just recognizing that if we don't pick up the pieces, what are we handing to our children? That's a big piece of the Fathers of Liberty as well. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's also, like you said, building a legacy for the next generation. If you got kids, I definitely want my kids to know their liberties, to be taught well, to be educated. And obviously I want to pass down a better America than what I found. And I think that's most guys' hope is to do that for their kids. So, that's one of the reasons we're here. We want to learn and grow as we do more podcast episodes, and hopefully you guys will join us on the journey. And yeah.
So we're so happy you guys are here, and we really hope that you guys tune in for the next one. And we're gonna step into a little more knowledge in the Sons of Liberty, a little more knowledge into the players, the Loyal Nine, these like men's clubs that were alive at that time. Even the term men's club would people would start itching in their seats, like, oh my gosh, is it so sexist, right? And so we have some of those here in Utah that we are in, and it creates some very interesting things compared to just very feminist culture, and we got to be masculine men, and so we're going to really step into the Sons of Liberty. How are they formed? What did that look like? And also just talking about the different players in Boston, and the differences between the Massachusetts, Boston founding fathers versus the Virginian guys that we really are taught about in our history books. And and just dive into some of these different people, Minutemen, Black Robe regiments, some things that you may have not thought about really, and that may be a little more eye-opening. But yeah, our main goal is that people would be attentive of their liberties, and they would know tyranny, right?
Yep.
So, Rashawn, you want to read this last Sam Adams quote?
Yeah.
Okay.
If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or armed. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may your posterity forget that ye were our countrymen.
Boom. Sam Adams. Man. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it, and look forward to having you on the other side.
Be free, be strong, be ready.
Be a father of liberty.
Plant the seed in our homeland, boys, let it grow where all can see. Feed it with our devotion, boys, call it the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. Save it from the storm, boys, water down its roots with tea. And the sun will always shine on the old Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. It will grow as we grow, boys, it will be as strong as we. We must cling to our faith, boys, faith in the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons